Hello, I'm SB Moores, and today I wanted to make a video talking about a character from the Malazan Book of the Fallen series, in specific, somebody who appears, I believe, briefly in Gardens of the Moon, is probably mentioned in every book, but is most prominent in the Genabakis plot lines being Gardens of the Moon, Memories of Ice, and Toll the Hounds. Before I say who the character is, this is going to be spoilers up until Toll the Hounds, so take that as you will. If you're not at least finished Toll the Hounds, because this will go up right until the end of Toll the Hounds. Come back and watch it after you've finished those, if you have not yet. But the character in specific that I wanted to talk about is the High King Kallor. Um, you know, Starting out in the first book, he's sort of allied with the Free Cities. He's on Kaladin Brood's side with his army, trying to stop the Malazan conquest of Genabakis. Uh, the first time I guess you would imagine him being anywhere is, I believe it's mentioned at one point that he was present during Black Dog, which came right before um, the Siege of Pale, or Pale. But really the first time I remember seeing him was in Memories of Ice, and we didn't really get a lot of him. And of course, he is one of the central figures of the prologue of Memories of Ice, or one important figure during that like three-part prologue. Um, but you don't really get a lot of him in that book. You get some of him. He does have some very important moments, obviously. A lot of character building to find out who High King Kallor really is. But I feel like most of what we see in at least the Malazan Book of the Fallen, I don't know if he appears in any of the prequels or sequels or side series. Not side series. I don't know if he appears in novels of the Malazan Empire. Since I accidentally said that, I'm gonna say this real quick because I made an argumentative comment on a post the other day, which is that Malazan Book of the Fallen is not the main series. It is just the largest and the one that was first published, and probably what most people are most acquainted with in terms of Malazan. I think that if you're gonna call anything the main series, it's gonna be uh, the Malazan Book of the Fallen as well as novels of the Malazan Empire. And while I haven't read all of the novels of the Malazan Empire, I say that more as like a way to respect the fact that it was Ian C. Esselmont and Stephen Erickson who wrote in this world. And I don't think that Stephen Erickson's writing supersedes or is, uh, more important, you could say, than Ian C. Esselmont's, even though I haven't read his, more of like a respecting his contribution to the world thing. But I don't know if Kallor appears in any of his books. I think he might, but I'm not quite sure on that. But I feel like most of what I've read of him, at least in the Malazan Book of the Fallen, to my knowledge, it happens in Toll the Hounds, and I don't believe he appears again in the Malazan Book of the Fallen series after that. I'd be very surprised if he did. Um, but I won't say why. But so that's why I thought it was a good I could finally make a video talking about Kallor, because after reading Toll the Hounds, I feel like I have a decently complete view of his arc or lack thereof that we see throughout the books. And the reason that I say lack thereof is because, to my understanding, by the end of Toll the Hounds, Kallor never actually learns anything. He just continues with the way he is. The arc more is that we get the initial presentation of Kallor, and then towards the end of Toll the Hounds and throughout Toll the Hounds, seeing a lot more of him, we just get more of what Kallor is really like underneath the uh, veneer, the very the guild, the very brown, disgusting gilding that is what appears to be this High King. But arguably he still is that on the inside. But there's a lot of depth to his character that really gets shown in Toll the Hounds, and for those reasons, I just wanted to talk about him. I was just thinking about him and decided it would be a great video to make. Just because he's so interesting. But to start off with, one of the reasons that I think Kallor is so interesting is his unnaturally and amazingly long life. And this really plays into the prologue of Memories of Ice, where we first see him, and a lot of the information presented to us um, throughout the series about what Kallor did, certain quotes by specific people that really come together to paint a picture of the history of this man. Um, so obviously in the prologue of Memories of Ice, we see three elder gods, Draconus, Karul, and the Sister of Cold Nights, I believe is her name. Um, going to, I believe it's either Jakaruku or um what later became the Imperial Warren, unless Jakaruku was larger and then part of it became the Imperial Warren. I'm not completely sure on that. I don't quite remember it all, and I don't peruse the wiki with stuff that I'm not quite sure on because I don't want to get spoiled. I did peruse Kallor's wiki a little bit before this just to remind myself of some things that he did in Memories of Ice and if there was anything he did in Gardens of the Moon. I don't remember. And it seems as if I was right on that mark. He didn't really do much in Gardens of the Moon, but I do remember a decent bit what he did in Memories of Ice. I just wanted to remind myself. But with that prologue, we see that Kallor has destroyed an entire continent, razed it to the very ground, burned and scorched everything to the very earth. I mean, we know that this becomes the Imperial Warren wherever he is, be it Jakaruku or just a part of Jakaruku or a different continent that is no longer on the Malazan world. But whatever the case is, it is completely destroyed. I mean, when people travel through the Imperial Warren in these books, they describe it as literally just endless ash in every direction, with the occasional monolith or remnants left in the ashes, like bones. We see what looks to be a building that has Kallor's crest on it at a certain point in the series, and while I think this probably came later, there is that crucified dragon with the Queen of Dreams' barrier in the Imperial Warren, but that might be like a warren within a warren. I wasn't completely sure on that. They said it was a barrier. To me, I thought it was like a permanent opening between two warrens. If you subscribe to the belief that the warrens are completely separate, which not everybody does, even stated throughout the books that humans have a very regimented, incomplete understanding of what the warrens and the holds and the different realms are. They're all really the same, but are they really? I don't know. It's tackled very differently every time we see it. Uh, that's kind of a tangent, but it's one of the reasons I think the magic's so cool because you don't really understand it, but it's presented in a very interesting way. It's cool vibes, I guess is what you could say. But with Kallor seeing him in this initial position, I mean, this is an extraordinarily strong way to introduce a character, or to get more glean more information on a character that we've seen essentially nothing about up until this point. And what we glean is that he's extremely cruel. I mean, he what he does is destroy an entire continent just so that three elder gods can't stop him from conducting whatever he was doing. Maybe I think it's implied he was just a very tyrannical ruler, very cruel. Not cruel. He was very cruel. Um, which all I mean, immediately I was like, wow, this guy is a lot more interesting than I thought. I mean, the name already, High King Kallor, is very interesting. And I think it was already mentioned up until this point that he's a military genius among geniuses. It's mentioned that he is potentially tens of thousands of years old, and he's ruled over terrible empires much larger than the Malazan Empire ever is, or was, or will be, from what I'm assuming. Multiple continents, I'm assuming spanning. millennia, considering how old he is. But in this prologue, we see this very strange um personality that Kallor has, and these very strange ideas he has and what he does, because he takes the idea of you're not going to let me be a tyrannical ruler, so I'm just going to destroy everything. And which is a very childish way of thinking about it, of doing something. It's sort of that, almost it really reminds me of like when you're kids and you're playing with a toy and somebody else wants to, and you don't want to give it up. And then your mother or your father or some adult or somebody tells you to share. And so you just decide to throw the toy away or break it. Cause, if I can't have it, then you're not going to have it. Maybe I was just, not a nice kid, but, uh, that's what it kind of reminds me of, just a classical scene of that. And which is very telling of the kind of person that Calor is already up until this point, which is very early on in his life, considering this was like 100,000 years before the main story, or sometime around then. And at this point, it is already, this is when he gains his immortality. Three curses upon Calor. He will never succeed in his endeavors, he will live forever, and he will grow old forever. He kind of circumnavigates one of those by um with alchemy, so he doesn't really grow any older. He's already an old man, but he's not going to grow any older. But the other two are definitely still true, because it seems as if every empire and everything that Calor does always ends in personal tragedy. And he delivers three curses upon the elder gods, and as we find out, apparently Calor's curses are just as powerful because all of what he said came true. Uh, Draconus never seen again. Um, the Karul lost all of his followers, and now he's an elder god that's not too widely worshipped. And then there is the Sister of Cold Nights, and I forget exactly the curse that he put upon them, but uh, I mean, I don't recall too much about the Sister of Cold Nights, so whatever he did probably worked. Um, in that regard. But a lot of what we see of Calor throughout Memories of Ice is this very jaded, very old, very just cynical outlook on the world. If anything, he is the cynical part of the world because he is completely self-serving, as we see in most of what he does. It seems like everything that he does, he just does on a whim because he feels like it. He's fighting the Malazans, it seems, just because he's a military commander, so I mean he might as well be in a war. And I forget if there's any specific deeper meanings, but from what I gathered, even reading it back then, I remember just thinking, wow, this dude is just a. He's just the worst, in all honesty. He is just the worst. He's just, like I said, the definition of cynicism, only for himself. And it seems as if his view on the world is extraordinarily nihilistic, uh, with how he views other people, especially going further to Toll the Hounds, where there are just all these little people in their little lives, and he doesn't care. His life is so much bigger than all of theirs. Um, Almost reminds me of Gorlas Vidikas a couple times, but they're very different. Very, very different. But uh, going further with this, there was something about Kallor that I hated back in Memories of Ice, but thinking upon it a little more and hearing what other people had to say about Kallor, I came to a slightly new conclusion of certain things that he had said and did back in Memories of Ice. One of those being him vehemently wanting to kill Silver Fox for the abomination and danger she represented. And for the longest time, while reading that book and for after, I always just had this idea. It's like, oh, he's just trying to squash whatever he thinks could potentially harm him. But I was thinking about it a little more, and a lot of what he said does hold merit with probably the ideas he's learned over his extraordinarily long life. I know that the idea of learning over your extraordinary long life and Calor don't really go together too well, but in this instance, he's lived 100,000 years. He probably understands that when something new and powerful like this is formed, and it also is being controlled by seemingly, I mean, even though there are some older minds in it, like Night Chill and Tattersail, you got to think it's still a kid's mind. So he probably has this idea that all this power in the hands of a kid is not a good idea in any way, shape, or form. I mean, the amount of power that Silver Fox was holding with the Talana Mass and just the actual magical might she had, I mean, borderline terrifying when you think about it. So I since then have gained a new understanding of why Kallor was so against Silver Fox existing in the first place. And I'm not saying I think he's right per se, but I do understand why he has this. But I want to also point out that this shows the idea of Kallor possibly never learns. Because even though it does seem as if Silver Fox can be a bit unstable at times, and what she does may not be good in all circumstances, and maybe what she's planning to do is not good in all circumstances, especially, denying the Talana Mass. Um, Not that Kallor particularly cares, I would think, but maybe he does, and that's something that comes up in Toll the Hounds, or something adjacent that I believe could make him care more for the Talana Mass and their plight than initially thought. But the idea that he never learns is so present as after all this time, he's still such a bastard. He's still such a bastard after this extraordinarily long life. You think that he would have realized at a certain point that maybe being rude and not particularly likable to everybody, and to just be as much of a menace as you can be, maybe isn't the right way to go about your life. And that whole idea that all that he endeavors to do will fail. Sometimes I even question if that was a real curse, because it might just be what Kallor does to himself with the actions he chooses, as much as evil prospers in Malazan, those ideas that good and kindness and empathy and compassion still exist shine through more than anything. And I believe that that's one of the reasons Kallor consistently fails, because he lacks those traits. He just won't. After 100,000 years of life, you think he would choose kindness, but he doesn't. He chooses to just be a warlord. He's the same High King he's been since the Kallorian Empire. And I mean, it's so interesting to see a man who never learns, who never endeavors to change, who's just the same always, and it always hurts him, and he just doesn't have the capacity or the want to change. And it really comes to a head at the end of Toll the Hounds when he's sitting in his room or in a tavern in Worrytown, and they're playing, the death bells, the very somber song for Animander Rake all throughout Darajistan. And all he can think to himself is, you hear that? They're playing my song, Grief and Death and Anguish. And he just doesn't have the capacity to realize that he's the one causing this to himself a lot of the times. He's just such an evil bastard, it seems. Maybe not evil. Well, no, he's probably evil. You could definitely call a lot of what he does evil. Especially some more things you find out about him earlier in the book. But there's this level where you just gotta think it's like, he has no self-recrimination about any of this, it seems. Every now and again he does, it shines through, but he won't implement that into his larger life as a whole throughout his life. And that is just, he's just taking the tragedies blow after blow, and then having a slight woe is me attitude, and every now and again having a oh, I did something wrong, but that's not too often. And that's the issue with his life, is that he just refuses to adapt. He won't evolve, he won't change. He's the same High King he's always been. And it's really tragic. It's honestly a tragedy. Um in a lot of regards with that. But going more with his character, there were certain things, especially in Toll the Hounds, that I really, really enjoyed, and it also shed a lot of light onto that instance with where he, kills Whiskey Jack and tries to kill Silver Fox, and it shows a little more about his whole ideas with that. Where he has this conversation with, I believe, Spinnock Durab during their battle, and Spinnock, I believe, chastises him a little bit for having killed Whiskey Jack. And Kallor finally lets out this rage and this anguish that he has for everything that he's done in certain, or for what he's done in the past. And he freaks out and he tells Spinnog, he's screaming at his face while he's on the ground, half beaten and bloodied, or across a way. I forget if it was before or after their battle started. Um, and but he basically just goes, "Do you think I wanted to kill Whiskey Jack? I don't revel in killing good men." Which is very interesting because it shows that Cowler has a certain level where it normally seems as if he's fully cynical, fully self-serving. He doesn't have any opinion except for negative stuff on other people. There are certain instances where he can understand that there are great people in the world aside from himself. And Whiskey Jack, he thought to himself, was one of them, and he considers it a tragedy that he had to kill him. But it also really comes back to that whole idea that maybe Cowler has some wisdom in his long life. Even though he never learns, maybe he's not dumb in any case. I mean, he's ruled over empires that are huge, huger than the Malazan Empire. You got to have a certain level of competency at that point. And so you got to think that maybe there was some credence to what he was saying about Silver Fox, but at the same time, he understood that there were certain people that had more faith than he that Silver Fox was good and should continue to exist. And, he didn't have that relationship with her that Whiskey Jack did. And he considers it terrible that he had to kill Whiskey Jack to do it, but it's also that idea that he will do what he has to do. At the very least, Kallor is a man of fierce commitment. I don't think anyone's going to argue that Kallor is not very, very committed to what he sets out to do. But I really enjoyed that scene as well as some words that he had for Spinnock Durat. A lot of those being, why are you even fighting for the Son of Darkness? There is no I don't understand why you. He even says he respects Spinnock Durat, and I believe Endus Salon was included in that. And he basically says, he's disappointed and sad. He says the Animator doesn't deserve people like that. But it also shows a fundamental flaw that Kallor has with certain other people, which is that he cannot fathom sacrificing yourself for another person, it seems. Because he was angry that Whiskey Jack did what he did. And he says he's a fool for what he did. And he says the Spinnock Durab is a fool for following Animander Rake, for choosing to throw away his life for this, which was very profound for his character. Um, Especially after all of Toll the Hounds, a lot of this novel, hiccuping, has been, or all the scenes with him have been honestly him just walking around and then thinking stuff to himself about how long his life is. Thinking about, I mean, one of the most interesting scenes was a previous wife of his from possibly millennia, maybe even tens of millennia, 100 millennia prior, where he had a wife that he offered to make immortal just like him, and that made her she was disgusted by this idea, and then she slit her own throat rather than being with Kallor, and he's just dragging her body across a palace, and he just cannot fathom why she would do that, why she wouldn't want to live forever with Kallor. And it shows another fundamental thing that Kallor is lacking, which is he, a lot of the times, just cannot understand, it seems, why other people don't like him in certain ways. I mean, he could probably understand why, like, the peasant people of his empire don't like him after, ruling as a tyrannical dictator. He could probably understand that and understand why people that are close to people he's killed don't like him. But his own wife wouldn't want that kind of life to be with him for that long. And he just can't fathom that. And it was very interesting to learn more about his history, about how he's so begrudging about everything, and it almost gives you an idea of why he has such a cynical outlook on life. I mean, if you offered your loved one the chance to live with you forever and they killed themselves for it, that'd probably mess you up really bad as well. But he doesn't have the self-recrimination in this respect to look at himself and say, "There's a reason she did that, and it's because of me. It's not be." And he comes to the conclusion that there must have been something wrong with her instead of himself. Uh, which is just yeah, it's very interesting, this character. I mean, this is why I wanted to make this video. He's just so there's so much to Kallor that is there's a lot to think about. And I might not be able to articulate it particularly well, but all of these things, I mean, there's a reason I've been thinking about Kallor since Memories of Ice, and I've been nonstop thinking about him since the end of Toll the Hounds. Not nonstop, but he's been in my thoughts quite a bit. And all these things come together to create just one of one of the most interesting characters in the Malazan Book of the Fallen, at the very least in the Genabaka's plotline, and at the very, very least in Toll the Hounds, because I believe that that book was definitely his. Ooh, I just got my recording interrupted for a sec, but no big deal. But like I said, at the very least, he is extraordinarily interesting in terms of Toll the Hounds, especially. One more thing to add about Kallor, which I didn't really talk about before this, because I wanted to get all the more probably the main aspects of Kallor out of the way. In terms of lore, he's extremely interesting. I mean, we know that he ruled that insane empire that burned an entire continent, has cursed the elder gods. I believe it's mentioned at one point that the fall of the crippled god was tantamount to the rage of Kallor, or the rage of Kallor was tantamount to the fall of the crippled god, like catastrophic calamities that have befallen the Malazan world. And I believe it is even mentioned in the fifth book that his empire, the Kallorian Empire, or I believe it's implied that his empire was the reason that the crippled god was called down in the first place, who's obviously a huge driving point for the entire story of the Malazan Book of the Fallen, at least. So, which is a lot of world history for the Malazan world. So, he's very important in those regards. He's almost a nexus for a lot of what occurs throughout the series. Which is interesting in all its own right. So I think that Kallor is just extraordinarily interesting. I wonder a lot of the times what continent he originated from. I want to say Corellery, but I'm not quite sure if that's ever confirmed or if I'm just making that up off the cuff. But at the very least, these were just some of my thoughts on the High King Kallor. Well, just an interesting character from the Malazan Book of the Fallen. I think one had enough about him to probably deserve his own video. I know a lot of this might be stuff that's already been said by people before. I mean, this series has been out for longer than I've been alive, I believe. So I wouldn't be surprised if I didn't add anything new or novel, but at the very least, these are the same observations and thoughts that I've had about Kallor, and I just wanted to share them because I thought they were interesting. But I hope that you enjoyed the video, and I hope that you have a good day.